Thanks, Vail. And so to that report, News 24 revealing that Vusimuzi Kat Matlala was planning to build a private luxury terminal at O R Tambo International Airport. Investigative journalist Jeff Wicks reports that Matlala was in talks with Nedbank for a 70 million rand per year funding for that project. So questions are being raised about how a private individual got this far into a national airport project and what the bank negotiations mean for corporate oversight. Let's talk about this exclusive report with the investigative reporter, Jeff Wicks. Jeff, good morning. Thank you very much. We're starting, I guess, the new year off, with some momentum, particularly when it comes to Kat Matlala, who's this ubiquitous figure named at the center of the police corruption scandal. Talk to us about this 70 million rand per year deal with Nedbank for this private terminal at O R Tambo International. But I also want you, Jeff, to talk to us about where in the timeline of Kat's emergence into public prominence when it comes to corruption also happened and where it fits in.
So this is ultimately about a deal that never came to fruition. But what's interesting about it is that for as long as we've been looking at Kat Matlala, his point of focus in terms of generating wealth is targeted state procurement. This represents a push into the private sector because he was pitching directly to Nedbank. And all of these talks, which included an audience with Nedbank officials and a site visit to the proposed uber luxury terminal at O R Tambo International Airport, took place midway through 2023. And the timeline in that context is important for many reasons, because just months before, we'd already named and exposed his links to the 2.3 billion rand Tembisa hospital extraction scandal, and also his illegal use of blue lights, gained irregularly from Julius Mkhwanazi, who at that point was a low-level underling at the EMPD. So at that point, Kat was already something of a public figure, not to the same extent he is now. But he was pushing this deal in his own name, and it would have made him a very wealthy man and a man with power, influence, and access at one of the country's key national key points.
And I want to get into that because in order for them, as you say, it got to such a stage, even though the deal didn't go through, it got to a stage where there seemed to have been some vetting, there was even a site visit, there would have had to have been some permission sign-offs for access to the proposed sites at ORT. So we'll circle back to there in just a minute if we can. Nedbank says this proposal didn't meet its requirements and so it went no further. But as you've just shared, there was quite a sophisticated and accelerated level of engagement around this particular deal, proposed deal. What does it say about corporate due diligence when reputational red flags have already been shown? You talked about Tembisa, you talked about the blue light scandal. His name was connected to problematic things.
No, I think it's important. The reality is, at that point, a Google search of Vusimuzi Matlala would have revealed his links to Tembisa Hospital. And the sting for Nedbank is not so much that they were talking to him, is that they had held repeated meetings and they gave him an audience and had a site visit. So that, expresses some level of intent on their part. And, all they were willing to tell us was that it didn't pass muster in terms of their internal processes and it never went ahead.
So nothing more from Nedbank. You did, as you say, offer them the right of reply in your piece. And that was what they left you with, pretty much like a one-liner.
That was the sum total, basically, which covers them to say that we engaged with this man. But that's where the sting is that they were willing to engage with him. Now, we may never know to what extent they knew who they were dealing with, but we do know that Kat Matlala was at front and center of this deal. The proposal document, which we based our entire report off, was signed under his hand. The cover page has Kat VIP Protection and Security Services logo on it. So that was the same company that was illegally using the blue lights. So it's hard to claim complete ignorance, but it does tell us that Kat is a very ambitious individual and was willing to have many irons in the fire.
And if you consider his background, one would you'd understand how far he was able to come, in inverted commas, based on a really sort of tragic start, I want to say, in his earlier life. You describe the project that was proposed and on the table, Jeff, as being more than a lounge. It also effectively would have bypassed airport controls, and that would have given him, with now regard for his alleged broader criminal enterprises, some really important leverage for those operations. But it also would have required people with inside the state or government or in the airport the responsibility of signing off on a project like this. Have you been able to identify who those individuals would have been that had kind of allowed the project to advance to the point that it did?
Well, not as yet, but we've told a story about a hypothetical situation that didn't actually take place, but the learnings from that are important. So Kat Matlala was able to take Nedbank officials on a site visit and tour to O R Tambo International. That means he was able to get in there. What remains for us to understand is exactly who his other connections are in that arm of the state. Because, when we think about O R Tambo International Airport, the implication is where the damage arrives for Kat Matlala, because these are private security companies, many contracted to AXA, control screening processes, and what Matlala was claiming to do was being able to fast-track customs. Now, these entities need to be completely beyond reproach. Now, the issue with Kat Matlala is that not only is his probity in question, but it's been shot to hell entirely. We would have someone who has had major aspersions cast upon him actually controlling the security processes, which involved who entered and exited the country and what they exited with.
And that's what I wanted to actually just ask you about next, about the precedent it would have set, not just for airport security, which would have been under threat and risk, but how individuals with political connections can embed themselves in our national strategic infrastructure.
Yes, and at the heart of all of it is money and procurement. So we know that Kat Matlala was building an empire. We found him at Tembisa Hospital. He made millions there. He stood to profit immensely from his dubious contract at the SAPS. And all of this was happening at the same time. This push to getting 70 million rand a year out of Nedbank was happening all at the same time. And what we've witnessed in the intervening space is the great unraveling of this man. And, he went from living in a mansion to living in the country's most secure prison. So a lot has changed in the 2.5 years since this Nedbank deal failed.
During the course of your investigation, Jeff, obviously you would have interviewed all of the stakeholders involved. You would have given people rights of reply. As you said, Nedbank wasn't entirely forthcoming or, explanatory in how all of this went down, the timeline and so on. But the same you would have done as well for individuals inside, I'm not sure, does AXA control these kinds of operations, the infrastructural operations, the physical infrastructure at ORT? Were inquiries made there, and what did you hear back from them?
Our investigation continues, and we are continuing to look at who could have possibly given him access to that airport. We have some information that we're working on, and at some point we will approach AXA when we understand that they have a case to answer. Ultimately, many stakeholders in this instance are spared because this deal never went ahead. But what we take from it is an indication of exactly what Kat Matlala was trying to do, not only with the state, but with the private sector as well. And there will be more to come as well.
So essentially, this is just sort of, the first stop on this particular vein or line of inquiry with regard to Kat Matlala. As you said, this is a deal that didn't ultimately see the light of day. But the concern is that there were levels of access given which should not have been given to an individual of his caliber, particularly at that stage when a lot was out there in the media about
You've hit the nail on the head. That's absolutely right. And we see a mirrored trope in his access to the state, in his access to state procurement and state contracts. So this was a man who had untrammeled ambitions and mostly fueled by greed.
So the proposal, again, as we've just confirmed, didn't go through but raises some concerns. Proposed major perks to private high-wealth travellers, and it would have allowed Matlala's private security company to conduct things like pre-boarding screening. They would have been able to fast-track individuals through immigration. How extraordinary or dangerous would that have been for South Africa's aviation system?
Well, I think it's interesting now when we know a lot more about the person that Kat Matlala is. On his own version before Parliament, he's admitted to paying what is, in essence, a bribe to former Police Minister Becky Cele. This is not a person who is beyond reproach. And the issue is having him and his agents handling what people carry onto and off of aircraft, having the ability to fast-track these individuals through the customs process, which is a function of the state, that's worrying when you understand the overarching implications that Cat Matlala has very close proximity to what is believed to be the most prominent drug cartel in the country, because we know airports are transit hubs. So, you know, the implications and ramifications would have been significant.
I mean, we're still at a point, Jeff, and you and I both were working on the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry, the ad hoc committee, essentially looking at the testing of the evidence and the veracity of some really serious allegations that have been made. You know, in the Cat Matlala Cele situation, again, that proof has to be forthcoming. We know what he said, which is now the ubiquitous, you know, Black Woolies bags, which are the money carriers. But we have to confirm, you know, chapter and verse that those transactions took place and that benefit was secured in terms of the evidence chain. So, I mean, how should, from your perspective, South Africans be thinking about this when some would say, well, wait, we don't, you know, we don't have the smoking gun evidence just yet. We do have a very strong prima facie case. We do have some really strong allegations, but we don't have the smoking guns in certain instances.
I agree with you to an extent, but there's some stuff that we can chalk up as proven. I mean, you know, when we think about the relationship between Matlala and Bheki Cele received gratification from Matlala, and he's admitted to it. He received luxury hotel stays at Matlala's expense. The cash, yes, it still needs to be confirmed, but the horse is bolted for former Police Minister Cele. When you talk about the overarching process, yes, there's a lot of smoke, and I'm almost most certain that there's fire. But the importance of a process like the Madlanga Commission and what's unfolding before Parliament is that for the first time we see public accountability and transparency. And it's a horror show about what we're finding out about our justice cluster and the way that the police work. Now, a lot of the allegations have not yet been substantiated, but when the dust settles at the end of this process and that final report is delivered, what it must do is really identify the bad actors who have betrayed the badge in some instance, and they need to be rinsed from the system.
Jeff Wicks, thank you for popping in and coming into the studio. Appreciate that and sharing some more detail around this report. As Jeff has said, they've reached out to various entities named in that report for rights of reply. We will offer the same as well. News 24 investigative journalist Jeff Wicks.